In most civilizations, there's been a tradition to bury the dead, and this has gone on in humanity for thousands of years. So I thought ahead of today's episode that I would ask people if they are aware of any interesting objects that people have been buried with. Most people are buried in their best suit, their best dress. They may be buried with a Bible or the Quran or whatever religious texts that they follow. Someone has written back to mention that their grandmother was buried with her purse because at the end of her life she would always panic about where it was multiple times a day, which is a nice gesture. Supposedly Roald Dahl was buried with her chainsaw, which is good enough to get through the wood, but not too sure what going to do with the 6 feet of earth above that. And in David Christian's excellent book Origin Story, he mentions a 6,000-year-old burial site near Farner on the Black Sea. And even back then, people were buried with objects if they could afford them. Usually the more affluent members of society that got buried with objects. So this mention of being buried with gold, and it's being buried with bracelets, even axe heads, and in one grave, even a phallic sheath. Not quite sure what that person was expecting in the next life. Afterlives with Colin Dardis. For this episode, I'm joined by comedian and writer Marcus Keeley. Thank you very much, Marcus, for being with us here.
Thank you very much for having me.
I've known Marcus for quite a while, so this hopefully should be an easy flowing enough conversation, but let's see how it goes. I won't be asking you any hard questions, but I will ask you, as we usually do, what label, if any, you would put on your beliefs first of all?
I would say probably agnostic, to the extent that it's sort of the belief that you can't know anything, and there's nothing more gratifying in life than saying I don't know to something. I find that gives you a lot of power, but I don't say that to have a power trip over the scenario of life. It's just more, if I'm going to boil it down broadly, it's like you can't ever know, so why say that you do?
Interesting. Okay, so why even bother? Maybe, or just it becomes from a place of resignation?
Possibly, yeah, resignation, and but not in a, I wouldn't say exactly in a negative sense. It's just more the concept of there either being something up there, all in control, and it knows everything about us, and our lives are all mapped out before us, versus nothing. To me, are two extremes. I know that you know me, Colin. I'm not a very extreme type of person in any sort of way.
I can confirm this for the audience.
But it's just, I think there's a potential at those extremes, and the extreme end of those extremes, to be a folly of man to say yes there is something, or no there definitely isn't. And they are both beliefs. You can obviously believe in nothing. I choose to believe in the fact that I'm an ignorant human and I don't know, and I couldn't possibly know, whether that's because my brain couldn't comprehend the concept of a overall powerful being, or my brain not being able to comprehend absolutely nothing, because I don't feel that you can comprehend either of those things. So I'm just going to go straight in the middle and say I don't know.
So you've obviously thought about this quite a bit and considered the broad expanse of where you find yourself, and then you're smack right in the middle looking at two polar opposites. Is this something that you've carried with you for a while? When you were growing up, did you ever have any different beliefs?
Well, whenever I was growing up, I went to Catholic school, was baptised, and all the rest of it, communion, all the way. And that was, I guess, sort of decoration to one's life. It was just, it's very typical to say, well, it was just something that was happening and something that was going on, or everyone else was doing it, so I did it, type thing. That was the sort of the background, the decoration to life. You go to a Catholic school, you do all these things. But I can't pinpoint an exact moment where I had a crisis of spiritual confidence, or a moment where I had false spiritual confidence. Neither way. It's actually, it's sadly, perhaps for me, some people might say, but also for the podcast, that I'm not coming on hard either direction here. I'm not a fundamentalist either way. Maybe at my very core, I just want people to get along.
Well, no, this is good for the podcast, because in episode 1, for anyone that's been following us so far, we've had a committed Christian. For episode 2, we had an atheist, and so now we're hitting the middle ground. So this is a ripe area for us to explore. But you mentioned that growing up in that kind of Catholic environment, and obviously being baptized and being exposed to those kind of influences. Can you remember having any kind of concept of the afterlife when you were growing up?
Well, the afterlife was always one of those things that's talked about, which seems quite reductive to say, something that happens after you die, which is obvious. But it's always the concept of, after you die, you go to heaven, and then all your family are up there and your friends are all up there. I mean, that's quite hard to visualize now, even as an adult. As a child, I suppose your brain might fill in all the gaps, but now as a functioning adult, you're thinking about, the intricacies of it all, such as, am I going to meet everyone straight away? Is there space there? Then you go, well, suppose if it's an afterlife, if it's a non-tangible plane, I suppose there's loads of space, and you go, well, does space exist? And then, my brain just sort of twizzles off into the distance. So maybe the afterlife and what happens after death, and that as a concept, or maybe as the sort of traditional concept, to me doesn't fit. I'm also of the type of person who will go, well, maybe, again, as I said, I'm not one to visualize this. I'm not capable of doing this. Maybe it does exist. Maybe all those ins and outs are all taken care of in the afterlife. But for me, it's just, I feel that I can recognize that the concept of that can never be understood by me. But then I suppose there's the answer of faith, because then you just have faith that it'll all sort out. But in my mind, it's not like going on a holiday. If you pick like a package holiday and you go there and you go, right, well, we're going to get this and we're going to get that, and we'll be near the pool and I'll be fine. To that's the type of faith that perhaps I could recognise more. But to apply that sort of it'll be alright on the night concept of faith of, sure, when we die, it'll all be taken care of and it'll be grand. In my mind, I'm not sure I can apply that. So I'd rather just be taken along for the ride then, and hopefully it will all be sorted out. I won't spend an awful lot of time thinking about it. I can't prepare. I can't, sort out the ins and outs of it before I go. So whatever happens, and sure, we'll see. But then that's my philosophy for going to the shop. So I don't know if that can apply to something as momentous as the afterlife either.
Well, I mean, you sound very inquisitive in your nature, that you've obviously given this consideration, and you have imagined a scenario of, what exactly you're going to experience after you die. And yeah, you're right, probably, in saying it happens after you die, so it's hard to consider right now. It's hard to put yourself into the abstract, and maybe because there's so many unanswered questions for yourself, this is why you're finding yourself in the plane of agnosticism. Would that be fair enough to say?
I would say so, but I'm also at the same time not necessarily looking for any answers to these questions. They're sort of, to an extent, kind of fun thought exercises as well. If you can, visualize this or daydream about that, it's kind of like a nice feeling if it all goes well in your head. If you can try and imagine all that being sorted out after the afterlife and you're in a bad mood, it might seem like a horrible thing. It might seem like you're going to hell. It's difficult for me to place that in my brain. So I have just reached the conclusion, well, I probably shouldn't be thinking about that then. And let's not worry, someone else will sort that out. Or nothing. Perhaps not. Perhaps nothing will happen after that, which would also be fine. Because at that point, well, it's nothing. So can't say much more than nothing, can you?
If you're going to be happy enough to say there's either nothing or there's something and I can't decide at the moment, then it's a brave stance, I feel, to leave things unresolved. For myself, I would be inquisitive and I would want to find out, and that's part of the reason why I'm doing this podcast. So I am quite interested in people who can back away from it and say, well, actually, I'm okay with not knowing, and the fact that I don't know is a comfortable position, and I'm going to own that position. And have you ever felt, maybe more, in more recent years, anything that might pull you away from that?
That might make me think that there is something
There is, or
specific,
there
or
isn't.
well,
Have you had moments of doubt in your own position?
well, if you think of people talking about the concept of heaven on hell, and a phrase that's been in my head quite a bit the last few months would be the phrase hell on earth. Say, oh, it's hell on earth at, down at the shops, or hell on earth here or there. But especially with stuff that you're seeing in the news, and perhaps it's because we're more exposed to it and all that sort of stuff is readily available. I mean, these are all very sort of cliche talking points, but from the stuff that you see happen in the world, either today or throughout history, for quite the vast majority of people, earth has been hell on earth. There's been no differentiation. Every day of them, for them, has been hell. It rankles a wee bit when people talk about the concept of hell, when, we are here as people, and if someone's current life here on this plane is hell, then what chance do they have in the next life? Why not try and make something more of what exists here? Try and make hell for them, which could be, someone in a terrible war torn place, could be someone having a really tough time themselves. That is hell to them. Why can't we try and make the current existence less like the end or the beginning of the next life, or whatever one chooses to call it? So on that point, I don't know if I've went more one way and the other. I think the focus has been more on one thing's for sure that would do know, well, more or less that would do know, is that we are here now. Hand wringing and worrying about what's going to happen after we die. As I said earlier, I mean, I think no matter what's going to happen, that's all taken care of us for now. And I think energy or focus or even just thought could be given more to stuff that's happening now. So I would definitely spend probably less time now in recent years thinking about what's going to happen after you die, whether there is going to be an afterlife. But you get caught up in your own politics and the ins and outs of your day-to-day stuff as well, so you don't think about that so much. You're more thinking in the moment and improving things for yourself now. You're not necessarily trying to get, the house read up, because when the time comes for you to go to heaven, that's important, or to get, better insurance, or to do this or that. That doesn't really factor into it. For me, it's just, I think time and thought should be better spent in the present, in the now, which might, upturn the apple cart a wee bit with the podcast. Actually, I'm just realising.
I think he's blowing our whole concept apart here.
you should focus more on what people think now, Colin. But yeah, it is something worth thinking about, whether you think you are going to heaven or hell, or if there is an afterlife or not. And I suppose a positive benefit of that is that could encourage you to act better in the present now, whether you think that's going to happen or not. I think you should I'm probably like an agnostic humanist more than anything, because that garners tangible results and you can see them, and you can make yourself feel good or bad by actions that you do or someone else does to you. Of course, that does tie in with a lot of religious thought on that as well. But
I think it's really interesting you bringing up this idea of hell on earth, and how we borrow that phrase and maybe apply it very liberally, but also we see so much atrocity and so much suffering and so much torment, and these are the kind of things that we think about when we consider the traditional image of hell that we're brought up with. So perhaps it's a lot easier for us to imagine a kind of hell, because this world already either foreshadows it or has an element of hell in itself, as you've said. It's not something that we've come up yet with in the podcast. Actually, this life may contain elements of the afterlife, or it's been brought into the afterlife already.
May well already be the afterlife. And of course, as we say, we borrowed the concept or the visions of hell from the afterlife. I mean, anything that humanity has experienced in this life could be argued is the inspiration for hell as well. So maybe it's all a big cycle. Maybe there is something in reincarnation. Who knows? Again, not going to be pushed on the subject. If I'm reincarnated, great. If not, also good. It does seem like a very fence-sitting perspective to take. Why shouldn't you have courage in your convictions and this and that? I'm very convicted in my own ignorance, and I know that might be maybe like a bit of a sellout, or might be frustrating to some people who have quite strong faith. To which I would say, that's grand. Your faith is grand. I find it really interesting. I don't think any less of people for having strong faith. I don't think any less of people for having absolutely zero faith. That's all cool and groovy, as long as you do something good with it, or at the very minimum, don't annoy anyone. I think is basically where I land on it.
Each episode, I'll be sharing a short poem partially inspired by the conversation with my guest. This one opens up with a quote from Paradise Lost by Milton. So near grows death to life, whate'er death is, some dreadful thing no doubt. And this is called Whatever Thing Death May Be. Might it be a void, or lightness, or the flame felt in a chasm void of light? Might it be the end of all things, or the beginning of the eternal reward? Might it be the self realised, or another rejection, one more revolution of the wheel? Might it be 72 hurry, or the indefinite adjective of all humanity? Might it be 9 circles, or 28 Naraka, or 3 Triloquia? Might it be a reunion, or a divorce? Eurydice turning away from Orpheus? Might it be the greatest hoax, or a freeing from all lies and individual truth? Whatever our deduction, one thing is certain: there's no creation without destruction. You mentioned how this life could be an influence for what we imagine or perceive hell might be, but how about heaven as well? And you did mention that it might be a futile kind of thought to try and imagine what heaven is like if we don't know and all your family or loved ones being there and how exactly that works. But is it possible that an element of heaven might be found in this life as well? Is it possible to have heaven on earth?
Of course. Most obvious comparison could be love. Could be having a really nice dinner. Could be any sort of positive influence or positive energy that could be sort of boiled down to its essence. Love, care, compassion, all that good stuff that makes you feel nice. For some people, of course, is an indication of, or a taster of heaven. And why wouldn't you want to continue this relationship with this person up in heaven, because you love them so much and they make you feel so good? And when you go up there, there'll be 20,000 steak dinners and there'll be all this, you know what I mean? But also a life of sheer contentment and happiness. Would that not wear you down? Would that not be exhausting as well? I'm very cynical, so I get fed up with things quite quickly. I'm very good at really, really enjoying stuff for a very, very short, intense period of time. So long as I suppose there's another obsession in heaven that I don't know about, then I move on to that. But doesn't happiness and accomplishment come from struggle to a certain extent as well? So I'm thinking in a very sort of primary school age concept of heaven, where everything's brilliant and the slides never end and all this sort of stuff. I struggle to think what would be a measured version of heaven, because we are humans at the end of the day. I think even the most faithful person would eventually break if it was nothing but unconditional love and pleasure. And in what form? Are we energy? You know what I mean? It's that sort of thing. I don't know.
So what we're getting at is perhaps a symbiotic scenario we need heaven to be aware of hell and vice versa?
I suppose so. Is there then a threat that you'll get kicked out of heaven and go down to hell? Is spiritual threat still a thing in heaven? Or have you reached the finish line? That's you forever. Again, it's a very reductive idea of heaven. I'm not trying to, make fun or try and reduce it down. I'm just talking about the concept of, if heaven good, hell evil or bad, then what's the end goal? Is my idea of heaven different to yours? Do we talk to each other in heaven? Or do we have to jump in a cloud taxi and go to Colin land? And who's there? Is there other people that we know? You know what I mean? It's just trying to visualize something like that ends up making me tired. So I have come to the conclusion of happy enough if something is there afterwards, and also happy enough if there's nothing. And there's nothing to say that after we die that we're getting a heaven and a hell. It might be another existence. We might level up, we might prestige and move on to the next one. And do we have all our own memories and brains and thoughts? Are we still the same person? Who knows? It's interesting that it does land on, in preparation for the next life. But the next life's grand and it's all brilliant, so don't worry about it. I'm just sort of like, yeah, it would be nice, but what's the logistics here? Like, how's this going to work?
But that's what we want to tap into in the purpose of the podcast. We just don't know exactly. It's an interesting thought experiment that you say about, moving up or moving down. And certainly people do believe that you can pray for the souls of the damned. And once people go to heaven, that it is potential in some faiths to maybe be redeemed and to get to heaven. But the idea of then getting to heaven but possibly falling out of it as well is scary to me.
Well, isn't that what the devil is? Wasn't the devil an angel who then fell and he established hell? I don't know what year, but he then sort of propagated it, and he was one of God's right hand men. But also the idea, and I think it is nice, the concept of, as you mentioned, praying for the damned and praying for people who have passed, or praying to improve someone's scenario, through that. But again, my brain goes, well, how do we quantify this? And how much praying is enough to do this or that? But I get the general idea of it's good to have good thoughts and wish good things on others. And I suppose in a sense, it can be true. Again, don't know. But if you put enough positive energy out there, you'll get it back. Or, positive mental thinking. And, there's people who can, what's the word? They can manifest. Manifestation's a big thing now as well. And I know some people who claim to have manifested like some competition wins and stuff like that. I don't think there's any dodgy dealings going on. But it's one of those things where you go, well, maybe there is something in that. But then you also can look at a gambler and be like, oh, he won 10 grand. Aye, but he sunk 25 over the past 10 years, so...
You've given me the idea that maybe I need to manifest a few more podcast listeners if I can, so we might hit up your friend, how is that possible?
There's some Russian bots out there that claim that they'll be able to help you in a big way.
I like it. Now, Marcus, being a comedian, I have to ask you, imagining the great stand-up comedy gig in the sky, you get to heaven and maybe you've got a choice of hanging out with any past comedians. Is any people that particularly you would like to meet and befriend in heaven, comedy-wise?
Be friends with people in heaven. See, in heaven, do all these people have an infinite amount of time to talk to me, and same for me, vice versa?
They're happy to talk to you, absolutely.
But how do we know that they are?
Well, in our thought experiment, we're going to allow that.
Okay, it's a thought experiment. Excellent. Now, there's loads of comedians who have died, obviously. It's a good point I bring up there. But some of them, the old classics, are they, and we're still continuing down the thought experiment route of this, are they frozen in time? Because there's a lot of comedians out there who were hilarious in their day, very, very, very funny. But then you sort of wonder, if they were to see how the world is now or how certain things have changed, you always have a wee suspicion in the back of your head and go, actually, you know what? He would be a bit dodgy about that. and would actually ruin everything for me. So the best thing a comedian can do is, number one, be good, but also die young. But then are they cognizant of what's happening? Are they doing topical material from heaven? You know, it's one of those things. So if we were to, I don't know, if we were to pick someone who's a good laugh, who's safe, who can we trust to not have gone off the deep end? Can you get booed out of heaven? I don't know. I'd say, you know what? Let's go safe-ish. Robin Williams. I think Robin Williams would be quite nice to hang around with. I don't foresee any issues there. Yeah, it's a dodgy one, because if I mention some names here and then we all go up to heaven and they've went way off the deep end about something political or something happening on earth that they weren't happy about, you know, then I'm stuck in that fan club for life. Not even for life. What's heaven life? Heaven life? I'm stuck there for eternity, being a fan of them.
Again, this is your inquisitive nature coming in. I was expecting just 3 names off the top of your head, but you've challenged this whole concept and flipped the thought experiment around. As you've introduced a sense of jeopardy that I didn't consider.
Well, that's it. It's either I have an inquisitive mind or I'm just forever fence sitting yet again. So there you go.
Well, Robin Williams, a lot of people I would imagine would be very happy and thrilled to meet him if they got a choice. That's good. So I have to ask, as agnostic / humanist, and you've mentioned sitting on the fence, can you imagine an event happening in your life that would change that position?
I mean, it could happen. I don't know what my thought process is going to be if an event like that happens, or I come to a realization, or, you know, everyone's brain chemistry is changing over time. Could be a completely different person in my head in 10 years' time. Could be something that makes me go, yes, there's a God, finally I've seen reason, or no, this is all so terrible, how could there possibly be a God? And it could come from anywhere. It could be something that causes me to go back harder into my Catholic upbringing. Could be completely different religion. A couple of months ago I had a Hare Krishna at my door. Now he didn't make me convert, but he did, which I liked. He said, I have some literature here for you. Now there's no price attached to it, but you have to give me something. And I was like, right, okay, no problem. Straight away I was going, what item can I give him rather than money? So I think I gave him like just some spare change, and he gave me a wee book on the afterlife, what happens after death and afterlife. Now I've leafed through it. It could end up being Hare Krishna. I could go back and read more of it, and then tonight, after our conversation, I become Hare Krishna on that basis. I'm open to experiences. I'm open to thoughts. I find going to churches and places of worship very familiar and very comforting, and anytime I'm on holiday, or even in a different town and around here, or over in England as well, I've got great churches and cathedrals, and any opportunity to go in there and have a look and soak in the atmosphere. Maybe one of those times to do that'll be the moment where just everything just clicks. Either way, yeah, could happen. I'm not ruling that out. Same as everything else, I'm not ruling anything out. And it sounds like I'm hedging my bets here for a deathbed conversion. I think in the Catholic Church that's grand. I think you can get away with that. So there is that.
I don't think you're hedging your bets at all. I would imagine that's quite a common stance, that people are open to different influences, and I think it's admirable that people want to find out more about different faiths and different backgrounds. You've mentioned coming from a Catholic background, and it's really interesting that you kind of find a familiar solace or resonance when you visit churches and cathedrals, but also to be exposed and to purposely be exposed to other points of view is definitely a sign of a healthy mind. So I think I applaud that, and hopefully that's one of the things we'll cover in this podcast, to get people to consider many points of view rather than just one. Thank you very much indeed for your time today, Marcus. I really appreciate your points of view.
Thank you very much, Colin, and thank you for being one of the few people to say on tape that I have a healthy mind. So I'm gonna take that. Thanks very much.
I imagine these recordings might be used in a future court proceeding. Thank you to my guest, comedian and poet Marcus Keeley, and thank you as always to Arts Council of Northern Ireland for funding the podcast and making it possible through their support for the Individual Artist Programme.